Hello, welcome. Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give a minute or so as people enter the space today. All right, welcome, everyone. And we would love to know who is here with us. So if you could drop your name and your pronouns and organization, if you're associated with one in the chat, that would be wonderful. So thank you for joining today. I am Regina Celestin Williams, and I'm the Executive Director at SV at Home. And we're excited to host you all for a thoughtful conversation um, about homelessness to housing, the continuum of response. Our policy in action at home is a monthly informal discussion convening housers to engage on hot housing topics. Every month, we select a topic or current event, bring in an expert to give a brief presentation, and then open up the discussion to ask questions, float new ideas, and identify potential areas for shared action. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Muwekma Ohlone, Ramaytush Ohlone, Tamian Nation, and Amah Mutsun, on which we are learning, working, and organizing today. We are committed to honoring and making visible the indigenous people and tribes that were intentionally displaced from their land, who remain here in Silicon Valley and are a part of our community. I also want to share with you our code of conduct. We want to ensure that the conversations and relationships here today remain respectful and productive. So please be kind and courteous to each other. No rude comments or personal attacks. We encourage asking questions and listening as we learn and engage with each other. Please also remember that today's event is focused on affordable housing-based solutions for homelessness. Sometimes the chat can get lively. If you find that it's distracting you from the content of the discussion, we encourage you to consider closing the chat temporarily. If a person is disruptive or otherwise violates this code of conduct, they may be removed with or without warning. All right, so now I'm excited to get right into it. We have Sarah Fields with us today. And so I'm excited to introduce her as our guest speaker. Sarah Fields is the Director of Community Engagement and Public Affairs for LifeMoves, the largest provider of interim housing and supportive services for individuals and families experiencing homelessness on the peninsula and across Silicon Valley. Within her role, Sarah works closely with elected officials, public partners, and the general public to enhance service delivery and increase knowledge and understanding why destigmatizing the root causes of homelessness and policy solutions around housing and the built environment. Sarah previously held government roles with the City of New York and the State of California, as well as in the nonprofit sector with Habitat for Humanity San Diego and the Bay Area Jewish Community Relations Council. Outside of work, Sarah serves as the chair of the City of San Mateo Parks and Recreation Commission and on the board of the Peninsula Multi-Faith Coalition. Sarah holds a bachelor's degree of arts in metropolitan studies and politics from New York University and a master of urban planning from City University of New York, Hunter College. Right before we welcome Sarah to this conversation, I'm just going to share a little bit to ground set. our conversation today. So at SV at Home, we really center affordable housing as a solution to the crisis of housing affordability and homelessness that we face in this region. It's critical that we think about how the lack of affordable housing harms people who live here in Santa Clara County. It drives folks to make what we see as impossible choices when they're experiencing cost burden due to the tremendous amount of costs from housing in this region. We see in our community overcrowding, many families and households living with multiple generations in smaller units. We also see a tremendous amount of housing instability, meaning that folks are one incident or paycheck away from being displaced and losing their housing. But it also ties to other basic needs. High housing costs and over rent burdens mean lack of food security, lack of access to healthy foods, um, as well as impacts around healthcare, being able to pay medical costs, being able to access educational resources, and being near or close to employment. It also has high impacts on being displaced from this community and can result in eviction. In San Jose, nearly 23 of households pay more than half of their income on rent. And then another 24 are also rent burdened, paying 30 to 50% of their income on rent. Next slide, please. What this means is there are numerous folks who live in our community who are affected by high housing costs. If you look at this slide, you can see that a majority of folks who are extremely low income and have incomes below $55,000 for a family of four are severely cost burdened, paying more than 50% of their income on rent. Because the costs are so high, disproportionately, folks who are very low income or low income are impacted by the high cost of living here in Santa Clara County. 75% of extremely low income households are paying more than half of their income on housing costs, whereas only 2% of moderate income households are affected in that way. Next slide, please. So again, we want to highlight the fact that homelessness is directly tied to housing affordability and the housing affordability crisis that we have. And the folks who are impacted are those who are in the labor force, those who are working, those who are caregiving for family members, folks who are seniors or may have a disability, folks who are trying to live here, but the cost of living here has continued to increase and increase. So these are folks who are our neighbors, who are our community members, and really a large portion of folks that we may interact with every day throughout the county, whether it's at our children's schools, as we seek health care, or in our businesses and restaurants. They are the ones who we're talking about when we're seeing the impact of the high costs push people into homelessness or out of this community completely. So with that, I'm going to ask that we go to the next slide and pass it on to Sarah.
So thank you so much, Regina, and to everyone at SV at Home. It's really an honor to be part of this speaker series and to present today. please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I may not get to them in real time, but we'll take questions later on in the hour. Regina read my bio, and I have experience in the nonprofit world and in city and state government. But I think really what brings me to housing is thinking about all that housing has given me, particularly that I grew up in a home that my parents owned, and my parents both grew up in homes that their parents owned, and the incredible gift of stability that those things afforded me, that frankly was completely unearned. And the inverse has quite devastating effects for many people, and we're seeing the opportunities of stable housing slip away from more and more people in our current economy, and particularly across the Bay Area. So really, I'm thinking a lot about and working towards thinking about both people and policy in these slides, and in the work that I do with LifeMoves, and the work that I do as a human and a citizen in the area. This image here shows the bedroom of a family flex unit in LifeMove's newest interim housing location in the city of San Jose at Monterey and Branham. It is a lovely home key site. If any of you are interested, we can probably work towards a tour. My email address is at the end, and I'm happy to be reached out to around coming to the site. This is an example of several systems actually working well together, which is not so typical of the homelessness to housing continuum. First of all, it's a home key project, so there's significant state funding, and then there's city and county support, City of San Jose and County of Santa Clara support that got us to this site. It also takes into account the history of shelter being both difficult to access and unappealing. It provides what we sort of lovingly like to call the 3 Ps, which are privacy, possessions, so the ability to, privacy, you have your own room with a door that closes and locks, place for storage of your possessions, and then the 3rd P, which is the one that everyone really gets excited about, which is pets. Historically, shelter really did not allow for any of these things to come into play, and also was sort of much more time sensitive. 60 to 90 days was common. San Jose especially has been very focused on moving away from those barriers to entry, but there's still quite a bit of work to be done. Let's go to the next slide. To really understand all of those things that Regina was saying in terms of just the high cost of housing, and that nearly half of San Jose is finding themselves rent burdened, we need to look back and understand our history here and how we've gotten to the place of significant housing instability and significant homelessness across our region. So, California is an interesting state. To be clear, I love California. I was born here. I grew up here. I spent about a decade in New York, but then, subsequently returned. California, as much as it's seen as a great progressive state, has really led the way, and not in a good way, in my opinion, towards public disinvestment, both in housing and in supportive services. And these 3 images, kind of illustrate across time what that has looked like. So the image on the far left shows a map of San Jose that was used by banking and institutions known for something called redlining. Probably most of you are familiar with the term, that got into both segregation of housing by race, and also where community investment was really going to take place. So, I think there are a lot of sort of casual observers who who understand the West Coast as a more progressive place and think that we didn't have the same kinds of racial challenges as the South or as the Northeast. Unfortunately, this is just not true. Um, Additionally, in addition to sort of that post-World War II housing production period that was racially divided, in 1950, California passed something called Prop 10, which gave way to a constitutional article, Article 34, that requires voter approval for publicly funded low-income rental housing. This is a tremendous obstacle in being able to create affordable housing. Voter approval or sort of societal views on low income and frankly poor people um, uh, has been really quite a roadblock, and it's a sort of woven across all these different issues that we're going to talk about today. So that's 1950. Across the 1960s, we see something called the deinstitutionalization movement. So the middle photo, there's Agnew State Hospital, which of course was called a mental asylum uh, for a time. Um, the deinstitutionalization movement really was an interesting blend of sort of the political right and the political left coming together, motivated by very different ideas. Sort of the left thinking that these sort of state hospitals were inhumane and not the right way to treat people who needed real supportive services and assistance. And on the right, there was just an interest in cutting cost, frankly, not so different from today. Not necessarily very kind, not necessarily very interested in long-term outcomes or health, but just interested in, frankly, spending less money, less public money. On the sort of more left-leaning deinstitutionalization movement really was looking to build community health centers and other kinds of local supports that were more community-based. Of course, that never materialized. Also in the 1960s, the federal agency looking to develop housing across the country, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, was established. It has, from my perspective, and I'm not alone in thinking this, it has never been funded to the capacity it has needed to really make a dent across the country. And right now, as with most of our federal agencies, is being even more disinvested and defunded, with about half of the staff leaving or being laid off. Another important note here is in 1978, Prop 13, which had to do with, of course, our property and taxes, both residential and commercial, and it limits 1 or 2% increases on property tax every year. Of course, the motivation behind that was to be able to keep for individuals and families and to be able to stay in their business, their homes long term and not get priced out because of high taxes. But that has really served, frankly, to defund a lot of local services and our schooling. It's also what's kept so many people long term in homes that they no longer necessarily need. We're a notorious state for empty bedrooms. So, people, as they grow older, their children move out and they stay in their homes in what sometimes is lovingly called golden handcuffs, because it would be very expensive for them to move. There are some loopholes around that, but very few. So that brings us to today. Each one of these bullet points, I want to be clear, could be probably at least a semester's worth of a college class. So I'm not doing any of them justice, and I want that to be clear to all of you. But as of this month, March of 2025, the average one bedroom in San Jose is just over $2,600 a month. And there's quite a bit of variance across different neighborhoods. So you might think that's very high or very low. But nonetheless, about $2,600 a month for a one bedroom apartment. And the median home sale price in San Jose is about $1.5 million, or roughly $900 a square foot. And I think this is important to note, that the typical home in San Jose is sold in about 10 days. And I didn't put it here, but I think it's also useful to know it's usually the homes are selling between about 8 and 10% above asking price within that 10-day period. So we're really just seeing all of that history come to a head. All of these things, the various propositions, the deinstitutionalization movement, has led to a place where it is harder to enter the housing, it is harder to purchase a home. There are fewer homes to be had, and rents are increasing. Next slide, please. So I used to have a colleague here at LifeMoves who would say that, the last group of people that in polite company you can say terrible things about are the unhoused. And I will say, having been at LifeMoves now for almost 3 years, that is my experience. That when I am out in the world and, I don't know, I'm at a friend's for dinner, and I meet someone new and I tell them, what it is I do, often I am then met with a series of questions about what's really happening with our clients. Aren't they really fill in the blank? Aren't they really using drugs? Aren't they really, you know, often the word is crazy or something. And, you know, in polite company, it's, if someone said something, racist or homophobic, anti-Semitic, I would certainly hope that there'd be a significant pushback and, frankly, horror. Um, This is not the case, though, when people speak of uh, the stigmas and the fears that they have around unhoused individuals. A lot of that comes from fear, but the societal acceptance of that is, to me, quite shocking. Um, and that really has a huge impact on our work, both at like LifeMoves, other providers, but it also, you see it play out when affordable housing developments are proposed within communities, that the pushback is quite significant, and it really stems from those stigmas and stereotypes, and those create very real barriers to being able to build stability. Now, once upon a time, there was this kind of social science idea that, sort of the root causes of homelessness were threefold: economic, mental health, and substance abuse, with the idea that there was significant overlap in in number two and number three. And that it was the easiest to assist people who were experiencing purely economic homelessness. Today, that's not really what's understood as how one becomes unhoused. Both because there's significant complication around that. For example, we know that there isn't necessarily a difference in population in terms of mental and behavioral health needs or substance abuse, say, in West Virginia compared to Santa Clara County. And yet we know that people are housed at a much greater rate in West Virginia than they are in Santa Clara County. Why? This is not a trick question. It's much cheaper to live in West Virginia. There is a better jobs to housing ratio. It is less expensive to rent or own a home, and the availability of homes is more plentiful. So we understand that things are just more complicated here because of the economic conditions. And I'll just say, often I'm asked, sort of what are the things that lead a client to becoming a client? And there's no one story, there's no one pathway into homelessness, but I can say that we see certain patterns within our clients. Often there are layers of challenges that take place in someone's life or in a family's life that lead them towards homelessness. Some examples may include, a significant illness, a death in the family, an unexpected cost, intimate partner violence, sometimes some people still call it domestic violence, things like that, real life hardships layered on top of each other, and then systems that are meant to support people in those moments for some reason fail. Usually it's layers of those different challenges on top of each other, and one thing just really shifts and puts things over the edge. Maybe it's an eviction that leads to these kinds of challenges, but something happens that leads to the loss of housing. So I do just want to say, here we see, this is from the most recent point in time count in Santa Clara County, and it shows a breakdown of where people are experiencing homelessness. So you have about a third unsheltered outdoors, about a third in a vehicle, and just over 20% in a shelter, and 11% in a structure it says not meant for habitation. So some kind of makeshift building. The thing that I really want to point out here is that you're seeing long-term homelessness. So about 2/3 experiencing an episode of homelessness that is more than a year, and about 2/3 who are experiencing homelessness for the second or more, they're experiencing episodic homelessness, that they have experienced it prior at some point previously in their life, that this is not their first time experiencing homelessness. So it's telling us that instability is something that continues to follow people as they try to move forward in their lives. And that really is a systems and policy failure. Next slide. So in really across California and in other parts of the country, but really very specifically in San Jose, we are seeing an argument around how do we solve homelessness that really pits two things together that should not be pitted together at all. They should be understood as complementary and not in competition with each other. And those two things are interim housing and permanent housing. And this is a graphic from UC San Francisco. The Benioff Center has done just tremendous work. I'm happy to give some links later. But the Benioff Institute has done just tremendous research, really very helpful work around understanding some of the root causes, the histories of individuals who are experiencing homelessness, what people are engaged in or not engaged in, as the case may be. They found in a recent study that only about a third of people experiencing homelessness are using substances, or are abusing substances. I will say, to my great frustration, and I think this continues the stigmas, much of the news coverage around that study still showed people openly using drugs, even though the study found that significantly more than half of people who are experiencing homelessness are not using drugs. Nonetheless, the stereotypes and stigmas continue. So I want to say, in terms of sort of the understandings of interim versus permanent, so much, I think, in those kinds of binary ways of thinking, to say it's one thing or the other, ends up sort of confusing the topic at hand. And the topic at hand really needs to be people, individuals, families, couples, small communities of people that want to live together, and a range of ages. We're talking about children, we're talking about transition age youth, people coming out of foster care who are young adults, adults of a variety of ages, and seniors, especially in this region, in the Bay Area and across Santa Clara County. We are seeing more and more people who are experiencing homelessness who are 50 and older, both experiencing homelessness for the first time and who have had episodic homelessness in their past. Interim housing is an excellent option. It is meant to be a transitional option, but it is an excellent option for people, especially who have been experiencing homelessness for long periods of time in their life, or have had significant periods of instability across their life. What we can offer, and what other organizations, it's not special to LifeMoves, although I do believe we do an excellent job at it. What we have to offer is that really a high touch opportunity, um, case management, actively engaging with a behavioral health therapist, classes ranging from gardening to financial literacy, different kinds of opportunities to develop your career, um, a whole host of different kinds of supportive services that are readily available to you, either on site or there's assistance to get to those different kinds of supports. So very intensive sort of period of time. We find typically, for a long time it was 90 days and then you had to exit. This was no good. We're finding as we've been able to have more flexibility about length of stay, kind of that 6 to 10 month period of stay is really where clients are able to succeed, whether it's through job training, maybe they can make a connection with another client and are able to then move on and become roommates and live together as a cost savings. Whatever sort of the next steps are, um, you know, building your income, saving some money, reuniting with family, meeting the goals that you've set out with your case manager. That's really sort of the magic of interim supportive housing. But it's really meant to be short term. And not everyone needs this. I want to be clear, like, I don't think we're the right solution for everyone. There are many individuals who, especially if they're experiencing homelessness for the first time and it's short term, um, individuals like that, families like that, especially families like that, really can go into permanent housing and make the transition directly from whether it's unsheltered homelessness or often it's vehicular homelessness, into housing. And the level of supportive services that we offer aren't necessarily needed. We do have individuals and families who kind of fit that category because there is such a limited number of permanent housing who end up in our sites. They take advantage of the services, and it's really an opportunity for them to save money, and that's also great. But it's not perhaps as necessary. And then, there are much more high need clients, particularly individuals who may have, a medical condition, a disability. They may be older in their lives, and so increasing their incomes or their benefits is more challenging or really not available for them. And so sort of moving through our program into permanent supportive housing, or some other kind of more long-term site that can continue to provide services and support is the right sort of next move. But in any of these situations, there is a need for there to be a real sort of continuum, and the sites should be understood as complementary, not as in competition with each other, and not that there's sort of a one or the other sort of solution there. And so really what this image is trying to get at is that right now in many of the areas where LifeMoves serves, so we work in both in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, we are seeing that top image where there is a high level of homelessness, many people who are waiting to get into shelters that and interim housing communities and transitional housing communities that are full, that are close to full, fully lived in, and that people who are living at those sites are unable to move on because there's so few affordable housing options available to them in this area. And the sort of more colorful image at the bottom is kind of moving towards the future and thinking about what could be. And so, as you can kind of see from the visual, the idea is to have, fewer people, in need of interim housing, and then to be able to make that transition to that next housing. Obviously, you see there are more, the permanent housing options, there are more of them in the bottom graphic, and that's intentional. And also that you see, represented seemingly different abilities and ages, and, colors and bodies going towards that permanent housing. So really, it's just we need a range of solutions. The pathway in is as unique as the pathway out. We're talking about people, and people have different kinds of wants and needs and abilities and capacities, and all of that needs to be really taken into account in thinking about policy solutions here. There is no, of course, one size fits all. I know sometimes we hear uh, kind of the less enthusiastic folks around development say that it shouldn't be one size fits all when we hear about state mandates. But the reality is it shouldn't be one size fits all for anyone. We also run a small interim site that's for LGBT folks experiencing homelessness. That's one of our smaller sites here in San Jose. And it's wonderful. Like it's great that we have the ability to specialize, and it's also great that we have larger sites where we can have medical and dental and even more supportive services available when we have 200 or so clients within a community. Lastly, I just want to say on this slide, last calendar year in 2024, the average client coming into one of our programs in Santa Clara County made about $12,000 a year. That's either through work or through benefits or a combination of both, depending on their circumstances. Many of our clients do work. That is one of the other, sort of misnomers about unhoused people. Of course, many of them do work, but $12,000 a year, I think, is just under or about 12% area median income. So it's quite low, certainly qualifying within that extremely low income bracket that Regina referenced earlier. Next slide, please. So here's some more images of our newest site at Branham Lane. I'll just point out the top photo is the dining area, and the bottom left photo shows the community garden area, and the bottom right photo shows the elevators. So something great about this site is that it is fully accessible. Every single room is accessible with roll-in showers, elevators, and other a wide door to enter through. Really makes a difference. So we don't have to hold rooms for those who qualify for an accessible room. We can just have, as we move through the referral system, we're able to take clients. So I really want to say a few things. Really, like when there is a proposal for an interim or transitional housing site in your community, say yes and show up and say yes, because the people who are saying no, they are showing up and they are loud and they are being listened to. When there is an affordable housing project in your community, same thing. Like there will be opposition, speak up and say yes. Like reach out to the developer or to the service provider, see what you can find out, but however you can support it, say yes. The other thing is talk to people, like not just talk to your colleagues or your elected officials, but talk to them too, but talk to your friends and family about housing affordability. Talk to them about homelessness within your community and what it is you think you can actually do about it. And there is a lot that you can do about it because really, like our policymakers feel afraid when they support a lot of these things. It's not exactly leadership, and I would love to see more leadership on these issues, but they feel quite afraid. And many of them do believe the stereotypes and stigmas that I had mentioned earlier. And the more we can talk and the more we can really share the human stories here and our own stories, the stories of people who have lived experience, the stories of our clients, the more we can say, like, our unhoused neighbors are an important part of our community, and we would like them to be our housed neighbors. How do we get there? And how do we get there together? So really bringing nuance and complexity into these policy conversations and into community meetings to really think about how are the ways we're keeping our community strong and together and not divided and frankly argumentative. And then lastly, I really want to say, like, center the voices of experts. And to be really clear about what I say when I say experts, experts are a variety of people when it comes to housing and homelessness. We all have a housing story. It might be a very stable, loving story. It might be a more difficult story, but and it might be everything in between or something else entirely, but we all have a housing story. Think about what yours is and think about what other people's might be. Um, so that in a way does make some level of expertise. The other thing is when you're in a situation of decision making yourself, really try to solicit the views and opinions of people who have lived experience. We're lucky here. There's a lived experience advisory board in the Silicon Valley that is available and interested in giving you feedback. And I really recommend reaching out to them and hearing more from that group in particular, but from other groups of people who have lived experience, because the feedback will be just incredibly valuable. Next slide. So this is my contact information. If you have more questions beyond what we get to today, I'm happy to be in touch. You can email or call me, and I'd love to know kind of from many of you. I know there's a nice group, kind of what else is on people's minds and how we get to a place where we understand the complexities and nuance of people in our policy and in our sort of bigger societal conversation. So with that, I will say thank you, and I imagine there's some questions.
Wow, thank you, Sarah. That was really beautiful how you were able to um, remind us that we all care about creating a place where we can have a home and where our neighbors can have a home, and how this topic of, homelessness really ties to the community that we want to build into the future. And so you did a really lovely job of taking us to sort of um, the 5,000 feet level of looking at policy and how we've really got here through policies that created obstacles for housing affordability in this region and disinvested in the solutions that could have created a different outcome than the one that we see today. But it's not too late. We can create that future that we all want, that place that we want to live in with our neighbors, with our friends, with our family members. Um, we have the ability to become more involved to shaping the future that will serve us all. Um, and right now, we understand that it really is about people and being able to respond to the needs of the folks who are um, being harmed by this housing system that we have today. This, system that doesn't allow for enough housing, that has the rent, and the cost of housing is much too high for the average first person to afford. And so we have a system that is going to continue to create situations and circumstances where people are becoming unhoused. And we need a response that understands that more homes end, this homelessness that we see increasing, and it's so valuable to have shelter that is caring and full of services and really, full of love and the things that folks need to enter back into stable housing. So I really appreciated that. One of the things that I was thinking of as you were talking and thinking of the people who have come up to me, either at church or in other settings and asked about what would someone do if they are getting pushed out of their housing. Today in Santa Clara County, if I know a family who is on the verge of losing their housing, what is the first thing that I should do? Or what is a resource, one of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
early resources that I should share with
yeah. I mean, listen, if someone, an individual or a family is still housed but they're like on the brink of losing their housing. There is something in Santa Clara County called the Emergency Assistance Network, EAN. It's a little bit funky to navigate because it's several different providers. We are one of them, but there are several. So LifeMoves is one of them. Sacred Heart is another. Um, I'll send you we'll send it out at the end. But EAN is able to it's based on zip code. So there's like a flyer that I'll find for SV at Home to send out later. But basically you call the organization that corresponds with your zip code, and there's a series of questions that you're asked, and EAN can provide assistance with short-term rental assistance, energy utility bills, different kinds of cash payments around sort of momentary need. But they're only each of the organizations are only allotted a certain amount of money each month. And it's not a perfect system. There is, I will say, at least a no wrong door policy. So if you call Sacred Heart and that's not the zip code you live in, they'll still help you. Same thing with us, of course, and the other providers that are within that network. So that would sort of be the first and foremost process. There are, through Santa Clara County, just through the county itself, someone just put it in the chat. There's a homelessness prevention system that you can access services through that process as well. And then if you are actively experiencing homelessness within Santa Clara County, there's something called the Here For You hotline, which you can call during any day. I believe it's from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Each day. And that is the way to connect with housing services.
Thank you. Because we know that it is those costs that you mentioned, utility bills, rent, that can push people into homelessness. And there's ways to prevent homelessness before it begins. But there are resources and the need to plug people into the homelessness, shelter system that we have. Another question I have is, so we have folks who are currently living unhoused, as you mentioned, a certain portion in their vehicles, other folks in outdoors. And there is this, and then we have shelter, and in San Jose and in Santa Clara County, there's a continuing investment in shelter. In the county as a whole, there's been a significant investment through Measure A in housing, particularly supportive housing. I would appreciate if you could talk a little bit about the concept of functional zero. Like, how can we envision a place where we can get to folks not being and experiencing homelessness to the extent that the crisis we see exists right now?
Yeah. Um, I think that this thing that I like about functional zero is that it reminds me a lot of vision zero, which is a transportation concept that says the number of acceptable deaths from traffic accidents is zero. And uh, I think that is true. And I also think the number of people experiencing homelessness that is acceptable should also be zero. Now, functional zero is sort of a funny technical term because what it means is that everyone who wants and is accepting services is getting them. It doesn't actually mean no one is experiencing homelessness, but it means that everyone who wants services is actively getting them, and that there's sort of an active outreach process. So it, in theory, at least, functional zero would mean much shorter term periods of homelessness. And, the trend of today where you're seeing, the majority of people who are experiencing homelessness in Santa Clara County are people who have experienced it before and are experiencing it for a long period of time, that you're moving away from these long episodes and multi-episode homelessness. That if you are experiencing this, that it is a one-time, short-term thing. I should say thing, period of your life, and that it is the most difficult period of your life, but that is the only instance of it within your lifetime. This is absolutely feasible, but it's going to take a tremendous investment and a political will that, I'm really sorry to say, I'm not sure exists right now. Um, the reality is, I was born in 1985, and my entire life, and for about a decade beforehand, we have been in this period of disinvestment, of saying the private sector can fix this, or how, the government doesn't build housing, government shouldn't be a landlord. And, a lot of this is tied into race and racism, that we saw housing built, for very specific groups of people. Mostly it was understood as black, white, even though in California we've always had a whole variety of people. And, race is a very curious thing, because my father grew up not being called white, and I grew up being called white, and we look very similar. And it's a curious thing. And when a lot of this housing was built, my family had limited housing options as well, in the mid part of the last century. But um, I do think it is possible to get to this place. We saw tremendous opportunity and modeling of what a different future could look like in the early part of this decade because of COVID. Um, we saw eviction moratoriums. We saw significant housing investments from the state of California. It was the one sort of moment different in my almost 40 years on this earth of what it looks like when everyone's looking towards the same or at least similar goals. How do we create stability in our lives? Because there was this one big, I don't know, let's say call COVID the enemy, and everyone was united against it. But I don't know, I don't understand why, poverty and poor public health outcomes and in undignified living conditions couldn't also be an enemy that we can all, unite around, without saying it's
Yeah.
this or jail, which is increasingly, we haven't really talked that much about criminalization yet, but increasingly that is the answer that policymakers, Democrats and Republicans alike, are saying. If we made, it's essentially like, we made the interim housing nice, so if you don't take it, arrest is a viable option. And that
Yeah.
cruelty is not the answer here, just to be
Let's Yeah,
clear.
and let's talk a little bit about that as we near time. Can you talk a little bit about your experience working at LifeMoves, seeing how you've seen criminalization impede or stop folks from actually getting housed and finding stability?
Yeah. I mean, listen, we have at LifeMoves, we have a state contract where we work with individuals who are re-entering society after incarceration. There are a lot of barriers to housing when you have an incarceration history, and it is completely counter to the goal of getting individuals closer to housing to arrest them. By either creating or increasing an incarceration record, it actually moves you further away. There are a variety of jobs and a variety of job training programs that will not take people with incarceration histories, and that serves to hamper your ability to move forward in your life. Um, all of the work that we do is meant to be, working with our clients in partnership towards independence and stability, and the ability to go out into the world and frankly never come back to LifeMoves, or if you do, you're coming back as staff, which we love to hire people who have lived experience. It's an incredible asset, but you're not coming back as a client. And you know our justice system is one that has many challenges and flaws, and certainly, arresting people because they're living unsheltered does nothing to advance a person towards stability. It further creates tension and stigma between unhoused people and the police. It makes people feel as though yet another system has failed them, because it has.
Mhm.
And for people who are experiencing long-term homelessness, particularly long-term unsheltered homelessness on the street, um, it takes a while to really trust that there's someone out there who actually does want to help you. And it's very reasonable. That's the thing I really wish people could understand. Like, our clients, unhoused individuals, unhoused families, they are making smart, informed decisions for themselves. It may not look that way from the outside, especially if for someone who's been stably housed for a long period of time, but you really need to trust that people are making the right decisions for themselves. And so when people aren't accepting shelter, or aren't going into one of our sites, or another provider's site, it is because they are worried about their personal safety. They're worried about if they'll be able to if they'll be able to stay together as a family or stay together as a couple, whether or not they'll be able to bring their dogs, whatever it might be.
Yeah,
Like, there's a real fear, and it's not it's not ridiculous. It's quite reasonable. And so that outreach process usually takes several months, and often there needs to be something that happens to shift the relationship positively. Maybe it's getting someone into a doctor's appointment, getting them eyeglasses, getting them a particular kind of food or clothing item that they really need.
yeah,
And with that kind of trust building, you can start to get folks to accept and move indoors. But it's a big
yeah.
process, especially if you've been unhoused for a year or longer, to come inside.
I really appreciate sort of you illustrating for us how policies and systems have continued to um, work against the goal of having enough housing and enough stability for everyone. One of the questions we got is about your mentioning of that movement around deinstitutionalization of housing, and I see other like systems, the criminalizing folks and using the justice system, disinvestment. How has race really impacted these movements that feel counterintuitive? How might race be linked to the disproportionate um, group of, population of Black folks that are currently unhoused in this community?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. Not in a good way, of course. You know, as as our civil rights movement became more successful, and there needed to be more and better access to services, we started to see a reduction of all services as a way to prevent giving services to Black people. Um, there's a there's a great book about this called The Sum of Us, that talks about the closing of public pools so they didn't have to integrate. So you start to see exclusive country clubs and other kinds of private communities, instead of public pools, which essentially just de facto, actually not de facto, it's the opposite one, where it's like in the actual law, you're creating essentially white only spaces. Um, the the system by which we moved away from uh, either public housing or more publicly funded housing, um, I think, not I think, I mean, the evidence really shows that it disproportionately hurts Black people, and that's not an accident. It disproportionately hurts uh, people who, like, LGBT folks, people who have lived in um, just in more challenging circumstances. Like the impacts are very particular, and there isn't a sense of how do we really fix it, at least not in a broader systems approach. Um, there's a lot of literature around this. If anyone on the call hasn't read The Color of Law, you should. Um, but I think we also see, particularly around the deinstitutionalization piece, um, we see mental health used as a way to control people, sometimes in ways that are not very productive. Uh, you know, it's a bit odd to say this, but kind of thanks to Britney Spears, we understood conservatorship much better in the last several years than we ever had before. But you see ways in which certain kinds of legal mechanisms might be used to control people, and race can play a factor there. We know that our justice system has challenges around equal justice depending on what you look like. But I
Well,
will just say, sorry, one other thing that I want to say is we are increasingly seeing older white men as a growing population of unhoused people. So it's uh, across Santa Clara County, you see about 50% of the population is white, and about 50% of the unhoused population is white. A disproportionate number you see of Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, whatever, that category of folks, disproportionate experiencing homelessness, and then a real disproportionate ratio of Black folks experiencing homelessness. And then worth noting, Asian people are doing very well in the Bay Area. Uh, much lower representation in the unhoused population.
well, I don't know how we ran out of time. This was a great conversation. We'll have to have you back. This was super helpful. Thank you for sharing everything
Truly,
um,
truly,
about
and
your
really,
work.
like, just everyone say yes to housing in your neighborhoods and your communities, and really speak up. It's so important because people are going to say no, and we need more people to say yes.
Yeah. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Corey, who's going to share a little bit about our membership, and maybe we can also launch the poll. Thank you, Sarah. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Regina. So at SV at Home, we believe everyone deserves a safe, stable home. And if you do too, we invite you to join us as a member. When you join us as a member at SV at Home, together we can build and sustain this movement for affordable housing, like we were talking about today, because we know we are stronger together than we can be in isolation. Because you're important to us and your membership's important to us, we want to make sure our membership is open and accessible to everyone. So there's actually not a minimum cost to join. So you can feel free to pay whatever you can. Of course, we encourage you to be as generous as your situation allows. Your membership helps us support your membership will support our work. And that includes programs like today's Policy in Action, which we do regularly. You'll be able to find, and actually you can now see, thank you, Allison. You can find the link to join us as a member in the chat. So together, we can work towards solving our Bay Area's housing crisis. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Corey. We have a quick 3-question poll to get your feedback on today's events. We really appreciate you taking a minute to complete that and let us know how we're doing. So thank you.